Right on, a recovered alcoholic. My name's Tony. I'd like to welcome anybody new or coming back. Great place to start. I see a couple guys got their books. Awesome. That's always cool. A couple guys said they got rejuvenated yesterday. Kind of got the spark back, and that's what this is all about. That's what the weekend's about, right? The roundup, come hang out and kind of get back to this. So I'm just going to hit some highlights on this. That way, when you go through it, you kind of get an idea of the way the book was talking about, because there's, like I was saying yesterday, a lot of people represent a lot of different ideas in AA, and we got a lot of different influences from a lot of different places. And if you were new, you wouldn't know what the message is sitting in the meeting, right? We read how it works, and it's really the most read piece of literature in Alcoholics Anonymous and least understood or listened to, right? Because we give the impression that you should be able to understand what it's saying, but if you kind of go through it, they're talking in past tense. Right? They're talking on their experience. And if you're kind of new, we tell a lot of new people, go read chapter 5. Like they'd understand what it means, right? Like chapter 5, that's like looking at a math book and opening it at algebra and kind of go, what an order, I can't go through with it, right? And so it's gotten to a place in a lot of meetings that they don't even have a big book on the table anymore when they have a meeting. Which is kind of weird, because when I got sober, it wasn't a meeting unless there was a book present, right? It kind of reminds us what this is about, because who's responsible for the message of Alcoholics Anonymous is the members, right? And what determines a member, I know their only requirement for membership is a desire to stop drinking, but if it was a fellowship filled with people like that, we wouldn't have Alcoholics Anonymous, would we, right? So there's a difference between the person coming in and being an observer and an actual member of Alcoholics Anonymous, a member in good standing, they used to call it. Being sober helps, right? that's one of the things. Having a home group, right? Being a part of that group and getting people to get to know you, learning the traditions, and having somebody take you through this process, right? That's very critical. Because when you start sponsoring people, what are you going to tell them? A bunch of sticker, catchphrase, sobriety stuff, and you're wondering why your sponsors ain't getting sober, because you're not 12-stepping them, right? There's a specific message to Alcoholics Anonymous. We read it and how it works. So, like, as soon as, and then we hear all these debates in AA, like, are we recovering, or are we recovered? And anybody who's arguing that we don't recover either don't have a big book or haven't gone through the steps yet. Right? It's that simple, because it says right in how it works. Those who do not recover are people who cannot or will not completely give themselves to this simple program. So you just told me you haven't done this, and you're able to stay sober on your own kind of program that you've developed for you, and that's the message you carry. And so what happens is an alcoholic actually comes in here and tries to get sober, and you're telling them how you got sober, and it's not working for them. So Alcoholics Anonymous was kind of developed for people who couldn't stay sober. How many people find that surprising? It was actually developed for people who couldn't stay sober, not for those who could. But you come into a lot of meetings now, and you don't get that impression anymore. You get the impression as, why can't you stay sober? I never drank. You should be able not to drink, and meeting makers make it. Just don't take the first one, and you won't get drunk, right? I guess you haven't learned your lesson yet. Thanks for going out for me. That's all ignorant statements based on the fact that these people don't understand alcoholism, right? And it's kind of like when or shame-based recovery. I don't know if you guys do that here. Anybody, you got that new guy coming back who took all the courage to come back, because they're trying to figure out why they left. Sit them in the middle of a meeting, and the whole meeting starts focusing on them. That's not Alcoholics Anonymous. That's shame therapy has never worked for any of us. The first family meeting would have got us all sober, right? The first time our kids looked at us, first time our parents looked at us, first time we got that incomprehensible demoralization situation would have not been enough to get us sober, right? Bill would have got sober the first time in treatment, right? If that was the case. But there seems to be something a little different from us. So let's take care of that recovered part right now. How many people would like to end that debate between recovering and recovered? Well, if you own a big book, the first page, the introduction page, it says Alcoholics Anonymous, the story of how many thousands of men and women who have recovered from alcoholism. So we'll tear that page out. Obviously, they made a mistake. It's the 4th edition, right? So we'll rip that page out, right? So nowhere in the basic text in the recovery portion does it refer to recovering, right? You're either recovered or you're not. And if you're not recovered, then you're in danger of relapse, right? So what does that mean to be recovered? Well, you'd have to understand what alcoholism is, right? You'd have to understand what they're talking about and understand to get the grasp of what they're talking about. You notice they didn't make that statement here, and then they said, well, what do you think? Right? So if you were to get this book in the mail, the first edition, second edition, if you were to get it in the mail and you were reading it, you would see right off the bat that this offers some hope, right? On the understanding, A, if you had this illness, or B, if you knew somebody with it, right? The idea that the basis of this whole textbook is the beginning of step 2, right? The receiving of it is a message of hope, depth and weight, without even realizing it. We're not even into this thing yet. And if you were sitting there, you'd realize most of us think, oh, the recovered part is the most important part of that statement, right? But it's actually the story. Without the story, the recovery part wouldn't have the depth and weight part. Like, I know none of you have ever been to court here, but the judge wants to know what your story is. You ever do something horrific? What's your story? Like, what were you thinking, right? And you describe the story around the event. And this is kind of like it here. So as we started getting into the content of this, which is really interesting, they talk about this in the preface as this being a basic text. In this case, the transferring of information we know from a group of people to the reader, right? And they make it very clear. See, we're funny. We change things and we don't know the impact of it, right? Because we think it's no big deal. But the way this was put together is pretty, man, they were like, I think there was some really divine inspiration the way this was put together, and the design of it and the kind of writing of it was more, so it'd be all inclusive and not exclusive. Otherwise, we would still be with the Oxford group. We found that palette of recovery didn't work for us. So when they put this together, there was a lot of influence on how they did this thing, right? And so it wouldn't create stumbling blocks for those seeking recovery. And so when they called this a basic text, right, and it's made clear, right, the program of recovery is made clear in this thing. So, but when we go to meetings, how many people is guilty of calling the fellowship the program? We think it's nobody puts up their hand, right? I don't do that. And we all do it. And it's such a subtle thing, right? We think it's no big deal. But the new person coming in here, coming into the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous, thinks they're in the program. And if you want what we have, they start doing what they hear you doing, not realizing that a course of action that needs to take place in order to achieve what's being offered here. Otherwise, we wouldn't read how it works. Right? The card says Alcoholics Anonymous is a fellowship of men and women. It doesn't say it's a program, because if it was a program, it would go against our traditions. Right? So you see the importance right off of that. So by giving this, so you're misinforming new people right off the bat, right? By calling the fellowship the program. So if you're in the fellowship and you haven't been able to get sober, then we have a program of recovery. That's why it says if you want what we have, not what you have, not what I have. If you want what we have, some of us are still trying to get rid of what we have, right? Don't take what I got. Okay, right? It's finding your own experience with this thing. But as you go through it, you kind of, one of a sponsor's job is to introduce you to this thing. In working with others, that was the first thing they would do before you even got introduced to the fellowship. Right, before they wrote this book, it was by word of mouth, and you would vet them to see if they qualified for this solution, right? And a part of the vetting would be the explanation of alcoholism. The more hopeless they felt, the more they would ask you for a solution. Now we're trying to pass a solution without even getting an understanding of the problem, right? So the depth to this thing is the ability to see that I have an illness that places me beyond human aid. But if I get told right off the hop that when I come into the fellowship that I'm in the program and all I need to do is not drink and I'll be okay, I'll believe you, right? And just start reading page 417, have acceptance around everything, just surrender, let it go, turn it over, and do all this stuff. I'll believe you, but I haven't treated alcoholism in its form at all. And the second thing is we don't treat alcoholism. We have no treatment. We don't treat it. We have a process that eliminates it, removes it, because as long as it's still present, I'll continue to drink. And a lot of people get upset with that idea, but it's not my idea. This is the idea incorporated in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. It's the 4th edition. If they would have found an easier, softer way on doing this, they would have rewritten a book by now, don't you think? 4 editions is kind of, no? Because we're some of the smartest people to get out of jams that I know in the world. If you want to get out of something, just go to a meeting, start asking around. Somebody will have experience on how to deal with that situation, right? Or minimize the impact of it. So it says, it doesn't say lack of thinking is our problem. Right? So we have to really, like I do surveys all the time. I ask people, you want to have fun this week? Especially people in their first 5 years, right? Ask them what an alcoholic is. It's amazing how many people in the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous won't be able to tell you what an alcoholic is. They'll tell you the consequences associated with alcoholism. They'll tell you what they think an alcoholic is. They'll tell you what they think caused alcoholism. But there's really no definition to what caused it. It's not my family of origin. It's not what happened to me when I was a kid. It's not, no matter where I was born, if I was born with this DNA, I had a disposition to become alcoholic, I'd have a different story. So we're in the top 10% of the population. Not everybody has this problem. So the heavy drinker and the alcoholic has some of the same characteristics, but there's one thing that separates the heavy drinker from the alcoholic. And if you did a survey, how many people would be able to answer that?
Can't stop.
That's it. What symptom would you call that?
Allergy.
So the allergy is the association. Once you start, the obsession refers to people who don't believe they have a problem. Spirituality is an association with resentments. So you see what's happening here, right? And so what happens is when like I've been fortunate enough, the guys who took me through this, and then I've been studying this book coming up to 33 years. When I, like in-depth study, I do 3 studies a week. I did one of the biggest studies in Vancouver. Like I really study this. In the last 16 years, my partner, my wife, now she has her master's in English. So I ask her about these words, the definitions, whether they mean the same thing, or does this word mean the same as this, or are these words interchangeable in regards to the content or the intent in the book? And a lot of it's no, right? And why would I study the book that in depth? Because my life depends on it. Like if you were a bomb technician and we were doing a bomb technician class, right? And now say, okay, first day on the job, okay, you get up there and it's like, and nerves, and you're looking at this mechanism, and your sponsor's beside you, and it says, okay, what wire are we cutting? The red one. Well, there's 3 kinds of red here. It doesn't matter. They're all the same. That one misinterpretation could cost you your life. But thank God there's some grace to this, right? And we're looking for longevity. Like you know what? Longevity is the point of this thing in order to recover. So when they talk about here, the collective experience of the first 100 men and women, where they talk about we of Alcoholics Anonymous are more than 100 men and women who have recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body, to show other alcoholics precisely, not somewhat, precisely how we have recovered is the main purpose of what? This book. So you hear people say, you ever hear people say, oh, the book's open to interpretation? It's not. It's their experience. Their experience is not open to interpretation. They told you precisely, exactly, clear cut. That's certain terminology that a lot of us should understand. If you ever, and anybody need that explained? If you ever do that again, whoops, if I ever see you again. So we understand that kind of, is that open to interpretation? No, it means, right? So, what are they going to show me how to recover from? How many symptoms are they talking about there? Mind and 2. But we hear 3 symptoms in the fellowship a lot of places. That, I think, comes from, a lot of it comes from treatment center, or it comes from people who read about the spiritual malady in regards to resentments, the human condition. So, if that was a part of alcoholism, then they would tell you in the first portion of the book, wouldn't they? So when we're going to kind of skip over here, and when you go to page 44, it talks about here, in the preceding chapters, you've learned something of alcoholism. We hope we've made clear the distinction between an alcoholic and a non-alcoholic. When, right? Pretty good. In the preceding chapters, you have learned something of alcoholism. So what did I learn? I learned that we had a physical allergy that separates us from other people. Who introduced me to that thought was the doctor, and he talks about different terminology in regards to that part of the illness, the physical part, seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. If I don't have if the physical part don't get my attention, then I don't need the second part, doesn't matter. Right? Does that kind of make sense? Right, so these phenomena of craving, these allergic types, they all refer to the physical part. The doctor talks about any picture of the alcoholic that leaves out his physical factor is incomplete. So now I see why I drank the way I did. It wasn't the pretzels. Wasn't a methamphetamine. It was because I had a different response to alcohol than other people, right? I thought I had the natural response. I thought other people had the abnormal reaction. I've drank with one normal drinker, I think, and I thought they were abnormal, right? And I dated them for a little while. I had to end the relationship. Like they had problems. 2 beers and want to go home. Like who could put up with that, right? So I ended that relationship. So anyhow, so they talk about here, we hope we made clear the distinction between the alcoholic and non-alcoholic. If is the biggest word in the book. If when you honestly want to, you find you cannot quit entirely. See, we think we're successful because, look, I quit for 3 months. That's not success. Right, if your driving record was the same as your drinking record, you wouldn't get insured anywhere. Well, how many times have you relapsed? More times than I can count. Right, how many cars have you wrecked? More cars than I can count. So if you kind of put those in line, would you lend somebody your car with that kind of history? Well, it's been 3 months since I got in an accident. Go borrow your mom's car. You're not driving my car. But we have a warped way of looking at things. So, and what happens with a lot of people like us, if you don't understand alcoholism, you think you're successful by getting 3 months, 6 months, or even a year. Right? The book talks about if you're kind of like us, we doubt you can get a year on your own resources. We give people the impression that they should be able to stay stopped on their own experience. Well, then they would be the heavy drinker, given good reason, right? Could quit or moderate, right? Ill health, falling in love, the warning of a doctor, losing of a potential of a job. I've had all those things. And I was going to quit forever, and I found myself drinking again, right? I found myself continuously drinking even when I didn't want to. Well, what makes you say that? So that's what they talk about. So that symptom that I bet you've never heard of is referred to what? So the book talks about a specific symptom in regards to the second symptom that most people in Alcoholics Anonymous don't talk about because we don't like the idea of being beyond human aid, right? And so it's on page 23. And you could look this up later, right? This is stuff I see some of you already arguing with me, and I just started. So, I mean, well, I don't know about that. It's all in the book, right? If you've read this, then they have a collective understanding when they put this together. And so if I've read what they're talking about, I have the same understanding. So if you're arguing with what I'm saying, you're not arguing with me at all. You're arguing with the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous that this thing was founded on. Right? The fellowship took its name from this. They had a recipe that kind of said, hey, we have something here. And that's what the doctor talked about. The doctor talked about witnessing this thing that was available for people like us, because he tried to initiate his process with people, and it didn't work. That's why he came, when the introduction to his letter was the beginning of the miracle of the observation of the miracle of Alcoholics Anonymous, where he talks about this guy upon his third treatment, not his first treatment, not a second treatment, not his his third treatment acquired certain ideas that he put into practice, right? And he watched this thing unfold within his facility. And he came to regard this type of alcoholic as hopeless, beyond human aid, because he had a program of recovery, or he had something that worked for a lot of people, but it didn't seem to work for these types of people. And what these types of people are, if you got a book, it's pretty cool. Page 22, 23. They talk about perhaps there'll never be a full answer to the question. Opinions may vary considerably as why the alcoholic reacts differently from normal people. We are not sure once a certain point is reached, little or nothing can be done for him. So they pass through this well-known stages where no return through human aid, right? We cannot answer the riddle. We know while the alcoholic keeps away from drink, as he may do for months or years. So a lot of us can stay sober for months or years given good reason, and even longer now because we got the support of the fellowship. We've got meetings every day, phone us. We have all these got treatment centers, halfway houses. We got all these resources at our disposal. But then suddenly these people aren't around anymore. Anybody knew people who were doing really good, see them doing really good and not here anymore? Anybody have that story? You're doing really good and then suddenly you're not here anymore? So something happens, right? And this is where they get into it for months or years. So that's the deceiving part of our illness, because we do a self-check-in, right? When you do a self-check-in, how do you check something you can't see, feel, and touch, right? If it's a phenomena and they get into explain this thing that is beyond my scope of seeing, that means I can't do nothing about it. And when it's present, I drink. And when it's not present, I don't drink. So how do I get this thing eliminated? Well, that's what this process is about. So they talk about here, keep away from drink, as he may do for months or years. He reacts much like other people. So, it's not my behaviors while sober that determines I'm an alcoholic. I hear people say, oh, my isms. This is my alcoholic behavior. No, that's your immaturity. It has nothing to do with... right? It's your adolescent behavior. You never matured. Well, the rest of the world is getting mature, getting a job, paying a bill. You were drinking, carrying on like a teenager, right? I lost my job because you're immature and not disciplined. It's not because you're alcoholic. Were you drinking when you lost your job? No, I was sober. So, you're undisciplined. People lose their job all the time. Why? Because they're undisciplined, right? So, anyway, I'll get into that in a second. He may act much like other men or women. We are equally positive that once he takes alcohol whatsoever into his system, something happens both in the body and mind. Anybody ever notice that? When you want to stay sober, then you take a drink and you become a different person. It's like you never were sober. Right? You're not thinking about us. Right? Not in the beginning. But you will think about us when you start coming to and ending up in all those moments of debauchery and incomprehensible demoralization. You're waking up with people you never intended to go to bed with in the first place. You know the stuff we do, wake up in different time zones, check the mail and coyote arm and all that stuff, the consequences, right? That's usually in association with a person that drinks too much. Yes? That's why they call it impaired. That's the consequences of somebody who drinks too much. That's an association with the allergy. Oh, that kind of makes sense. So they talk about here, in mental sense, what makes it virtually impossible for him to stop, or her. So that's the allergy. That makes sense, right? I'm not finished the first drink and I'm thinking of the second drink. Am I in the right room? yeah. Like, normal people don't do that. I watch my wife, my daughters, and they're not even halfway done the first drink. They're not even thinking about the second drink. Sometimes there'll be a long interval before the next drink. I mean, like either the waiter is on his way with another one or I'm getting another one. Like, let's just keep rolling, pal. Like, you know what I mean? Move closer to the bar, slow waitress or waiter, you order two. Am I in the right room? Right? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. My people, right? We're professionals. Right? There'll be no lollygagging. Okay. The experience of any alcoholic will abundantly confirm this. We just did this, right? I start off with good intentions and I wake up looking for my clothes. Okay, yeah. A few of you understand what I'm saying. I'm not related to anybody after 4 drinks. I'm in a room full of you. Don't call it kissing cousins for nothing. Okay, so we'll get to the 4th in a minute. Some of you need help. I'm not just joking. So these observations would be academic and pointless if our friend never took the first drink in the first place, right? Therefore, setting a terrible cycle in motion. So that confirms what the doctor talked about. The doctor talked about his observations on people who had this illness. And he says there's a group of people in his facility that were able to stay stopped and his methods were very successful with. Then he talks about there's these other groups of people where his methods are outside, like he's not successful with. And these are heartbreaking. These people, they die within their facility. Who are these people? These are the alcoholics with this symptom that they're about to talk about. And the funny thing is, it's not talked about in AA, which is kind of baffling. Why? Because we don't like the truth of it, right? Because the truth of it gives you a step 1 experience. It gives you that anxiety that everybody in the book has had who's had a step 1 experience, right? And we'll do a couple examples of that, right? So they talk about these observations will be academic if our friend ever took the first drink. Makes sense? But the doctor says this is repeated over and over. What does over and over mean? Keeps on happening. And so just because you went 3 months, 6 months, or even a year, a couple years, doesn't mean you're successful in staying stopped. It's that delusion of, look what I'm doing. How many people have gone up and talked about what a great job they're doing, followed by another 24-hour chip? Or how many people came to AA for a little while and then left and you're trying to make good. Why did I leave? Like, in spite of everything that happened to me, what brought me here? And why am I leaving something that I desperately sought in the first place? And that's what they're getting at here. So therefore, the main problem of the alcoholic centers in his mind rather than in his body. It makes sense. Because the doctor said, I can't drink in any form whatsoever. Any form, we can get into that later. Right? Actually, I'm not even going to go there. Any form that creates a change inside of me where I don't have to seek dependence on something greater than something else. And we all know what those things are. Right? I get a prescription. Tells me to take it this way. My mind says I should take it this way because I'm still looking for the effect produced by whatever I'm doing. Anybody? Nobody again. No. We've all been there, right? Part of my said, well, for the average person, it's 3, but I'm not average, right? So, yeah. Some of you are picking up what I'm putting down. Okay, so therefore, the main problem the alcoholic centers in his mind rather, but if you ask him why he started on the last benders, the chances are he'll offer you any one of 100 alibis. Listen to this. In meetings, there's people coming back all the time, isn't there? And when we ask them to share, like we're going to learn something from them, you're not going to learn nothing from them. Nothing. Because if you didn't learn from your own story, you're not going to learn from their story. Right? Oh, thanks for going out for me. That means I don't have to do more research. You don't know what you're talking about. Because how many people has relapsed here, and just before you relapse, went, oh no, I remember Tony's story. I better not. Right? If your own story isn't enough to deter you from drinking again, then nobody else's story is. Right? And if your own story was enough to deter you from and the consequences, then you wouldn't have the story you have. You hear people go, just sometimes the shit you hear in AA, the stuff you hear in AA is shit. And we don't challenge people on that, right? We don't say, well, you know what, for us in AA, our language, our understanding, and it's okay to say that. It's not our understanding. You hear people say, relapse isn't a part of my story. Then either you don't have a story and you don't understand what you're talking about. Because if relapse wasn't a part of your story, then you wouldn't be here seeking help. Unless you heard the dating was really good, but then you deserve everything you get, right? Sorry, did I say that out loud? The goods are odd, but the odds are good. Okay, something like that. So they go through here and they have excuses to why they relapse. How many people had an excuse to why you relapsed? Or why you took another drink? Come on, participate. Tell on yourself. So what you just did without realizing it is, you said because of circumstances, right? If this circumstance didn't happen, I wouldn't have relapsed. Not realizing it didn't matter on the circumstances around you. It was an internal thing that happened, right? And then when you get to a place that they talk about here, they said once in a while, he may tell the truth. And the truth, strange to say, is usually has no more idea why he took the first drink than you do. Some drinkers have excuses which they're satisfied part of the time, but in their hearts, they really don't know why they do it. Right? How many people had a horrific story? You're snot running out of your nose, you're sitting there at the table, you'd give anything to change your life. Remember Bill was like that the second time in treatment? And the situation that got him to treatment in the first time? If you read Bill's story, the second time would be enough if it was a behavioral problem for him to get sober based on circumstances. He hit his bottom. Alcohol was his master. He surrendered. He had acceptance. He was willing to do anything to change his life. But what's missing from his life is the solution that we have here contained in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. Right? That was missing from his life. It took Ebby to show up in his life to carry this message to him. And they formulated in such a way, once they started to see they had something here, and the doctor kind of witnessed this thing, he says, there's something here. You guys have stumbled upon something. There was an intervention on a higher order that kind of implemented these guys' life where they had an experience that they weren't able to create on their own. And then they kind of think about that. Bill's lying in the hospital the third time, and a thought came to him that other people might benefit what was so freely given to him. That's the experience that's available here once you've had this change. Before that, we're too self-centered. The first 2 times in treatment, did he think about that? Not at all. Third time in treatment, there was a transformation in change, attitude, and outlook that they talk about in the back of the book. So, here we go. They don't know why they do it. Ready? Once this malady. What malady? Did they say spiritual anywhere? No, it's true. But that's what we hear. The first time they mentioned the spiritual maladies in the 4th step. And if you look at the wording is very important. Chuck, my first sponsor, the guy helped explain the book to me, and George took me through this. Chuck would say, it doesn't say that. I'd get so mad at him. And I'll go back and read the book. He says, the reason you're not understanding what it's saying, because you're just reading the one paragraph. He says, you got to go to the paragraph leading into that statement and a paragraph following that statement to see what it's talking about. Made sense. I wouldn't have came up with that. And he says, Tony, my wife told me this. I didn't know this. That thesaurus is not a dictionary. I didn't know that. It's words that you could interchange to expand or to re-deepen what you want to explain. So they're not interchangeable. They don't mean the same thing. You change the word, you change everything. We heard, it's a point that I talk about. When you hear how it works, if you hear somebody say, having had a spiritual awakening as a result, you hear people say that. And then when you read it, you'll read it as a result, implying there's more than one result that we get here. It says as the result for a reason, right? As the result. What's the first hope is that I experience this change sufficient enough for me to recover, that I can start applying these principles to my human, right? My human dilemma or my human experience to continue my way. Because what used to be my solution was alcohol. And it stopped being my solution, but I couldn't stop doing it. So I needed a new solution. That's where they talk about these spiritual kit of tools laid at our feet to apply to our human experience. So they talk about that once this malady, and when you look up the word malady, it's an event that's really hard to pinpoint what it is. There's a whole bunch of words explaining it. You could get a word, say, I like this word or that word. Well, really, it's a condition that's hard to kind of pinpoint, but it's present. Right? So where does this malady take place? That's why, So remember, they changed the conversation. If we never took a drink, we would set the terrible cycle in motion, yes? Right? So the main problem of the alcoholic centers where? In the mind. So they started a new conversation, yes? They're not talking about the allergy anymore. They're talking about why we continue drinks. Once this malady has a real hold, they're a baffled lot. Why are they baffled? They keep drinking. Wouldn't that make you baffled? You're doing great one day, next day, hey, honey, how you doing? Well, how was the meeting? Oh, great. They told me I could have one every once in a while. I don't know if I told you guys this yesterday. This guy goes to his first meeting, goes home to his wife, and he goes, how was the meeting? They said they put me on a wait list. They were full. So that's why we don't like leaving newcomers unsupervised, right? We start working with them, right? Because this other guy at the men's retreat, he was going on, we had an open mic thing, and he was going up there, and when we talk, we convince ourselves of what we believe, right? We reconfirm it. And so our job is to hear what people are saying and go, where the hell did you get that idea from? Disturb people about it. That's what these guys helped save my life about, right? So this guy's at the men's retreat, and he's standing up there going, I'm a high-functioning alcoholic. And the guy was working at 7-Eleven just to drink. And he was going on about every third word, I'm high functioning. I said, whoa. Stop. I said, enough. He went, what? I said, there's nothing high functioning about you. Time to sit down and start listening. Because you believe that so much, you're going to start believing it was the job that caused your problems, not alcoholism. So then they talk about there's the obsession that somehow, someday they'll beat the game. Now, most people associate that with drinking. No, it's staying sober. Right? Remember, we already agreed. If I never took the first drink, I'd never set the terrible cycle in motion. So what makes you say that? Then they talk about here is that the people around us hopes that one day the sufferer will rise from his lethargy and exert his power of will. To do what? To stay sober. Right? We already agreed. If I never took the drink, I would never trigger the allergy. So it's how do I not take the first drink? So here, right, exert your will. That's what we ask a lot of new people to do, exert their will. Well, it doesn't say that anywhere in how it works. It says through a course of action that you could have this problem removed, that you can find a way of life that's absolutely beyond anything you could ever imagine. So they talk about the tragic truth is that if a man or a woman be a real alcoholic, the happy day may not arrive. He has lost control. At a certain point in the drinking of every alcoholic, he has passed into the state where the most powerful desire to stop drinking is absolutely of no avail. This tragic situation has already arrived in practically every case long before it's suspected. What's that? Why do I keep drinking again? Because how many people tried to stop long before coming to AA? How many people got into embarrassing situations? How many people had those situations, like I'll never do it again? And you'd pass the lie detector's test, right? You would, because it's all in sincerity. You might as well just leave your hand up, then put up the other hand, and you have the right to remain silent. That's some of the best 12-step calls there are, right? Good luck with that. So, then they say, squiggly word, the fact is, most alcoholics, for reasons yet obscure, have lost the power of choice in drink. And then you hear people say, I have a choice today. Then you never did step one. You're not either understanding what you're saying or you're different from us. Because if you have a choice, when could you exercise that choice? When could you exercise that choice to have a drink? Because step one says, there could be no reservations of any kind or no lurking motion that one day we'll be immune to alcohol. So when I do step one, I'm in agreement that I can never safely drink again. But if I was able to create that, then I wouldn't need to do the steps. So I start this process on an act of desperation to participate in the saving of my own life. So that is an act of the drowning man. So somewhere along the line said, I could go back in the water anytime I want. Well, I have a choice to do. That's kind of insanity. If you were standing on a bridge talking about, I have a choice whether to jump or not, yes, you do. You just get in the car, put on this white jacket, and we'll bring you to the hospital. It's an act against your own will. So to have a choice lacks all kind of humility, doesn't it? Really, because what I have is a daily reprieve. The only reason I'm sober is because my relationship with a power greater than myself and a combination of things that allow me to maintain that Bill talked about after he left the hospital. He learned the recipe and what would save the day, right? What would save the day is intensive work with other alcoholics. So they talk about here, this is what I was talking about yesterday, right? On page 25, it talks about, when therefore we were approached by those with whom the problem had been solved. If something has been solved, is it still existing? How many people say yes, it's still existing? If you brought your car to a mechanic because it had a red light on it, and he told you it has the potential of blowing an engine here if this problem persisted, and you asked him to fix it, and you left and you paid $3,000 to have it fixed, and you left and that red light was still on, would you say, oh, that's okay, it's supposed to be there? That means the problem is still present, right? And if the problem is still present, then the potential of it ruining the engine is there. So when I bring it to a mechanic, I'm hoping that the problem gets removed. It doesn't exist anymore. And then what they'll tell me to do is maintain certain maintenance to make sure it doesn't come back again, because it was neglect that caused it in the first place. But this alcoholism is not something I caused, it's something that had me as an illness. So ready for this one. If a person has a psychic change or spiritual experience that the book talks about, and you're the type of alcoholic the book talks about, don't say it out loud, write it down for your own kind of see where you're at in the understanding of the information of the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, which is our program. If somebody goes through this, do they still have an alcoholic mind once they have a psychic change or spiritual experience? How many people say yes? How many people say no? How many people don't want to get involved? Think about this. The answer is no, you no longer have an alcoholic mind. Because if I have an alcoholic mind, what am I going to continue to do? Drink. What's the miracle of Alcoholics Anonymous? Came to believe that a power greater than could restore me to and remove this problem. Right? That's why in step 10, it says, as the result of this course of action, I guess we're going there. We're going to have fun. I'm pissing some of you off. Might as well continue. Okay. So, right? So, let's go to 86. So they talk about, and 101 talks about it, right? That an alcoholic that can't meet this condition still has an alcoholic mind or something the matter with his spiritual condition. So an alcoholic mind is this malady that centers in it, right? As long as that's present, they talked about that. I've never seen one case ever recover of the examples they give in the book. You have the mind of a chronic alcoholic, or you have the mind of an alcoholic, right? What is the mind of an alcoholic? They talk about more about alcoholism. How do we help our reader to determine whether they are one of us? They start describing the mental state that precedes a relapse into drinking, the suddenly part. Right? Something takes over, and an ounce of whiskey in my milk or a highball of something happens in their thinking. On page 37, they talk about this thing as a phenomenon. It's an unexplainable event that parallels with our sound thinking. It's something we can't see, feel, and touch, but when it happens, it's too late. We're drinking again. Right? That's the characteristics of what places us beyond human aid. The book talks about that. That's an alcoholic mind. So step 2 talks about if I'm willing to go through a course of action, this change will come about. So on page 86, this is another part of the book that's really misunderstood. Anybody here, people refer to the 9-step promises? They're not the 9-step promises. They're in the 9th step, but they're not the 9-step promises. You ever hear people talk about the 10-step promises? They're not the 10-step promises. They're talked about in the 10th step, right? So when we read the promises, right, what does it say? This thought brings us to step 10. Not this group of action, this thought of what? If I'm painstaking about this phase of my development, this phase of my development, what phase? The men's process, as I'm doing a couple other things, they have to coexist. I cannot start step 9 without starting step 11 and 12. If I start step 9 without doing 11 and 12, I'm doing it under my own resources. So they talk about here, this thought brings us to step 10, which suggests we continue to take personal inventory and to set right any new mistakes as we go along. We vigorously commence this way of living as we cleaned up the past in association to this thought and the promises. As we cleaned up the past, they're still continuing that conversation of thought on their experience. You see the wording there? How many people still here? How many people really arguing with me now? So it's a thought, it's an overview. Anybody ever been to a travel agent? What you do is you look at the pictures on the wall and then you go and sit down, and what they do is an overview of your trip. What you could expect when you go to these places and what you have to do to get from one place to another. That's what step 10 actually is. It's an overview, right? Because after that, after they talk about here, this is not an overnight matter, they talk about before that, we've entered the world of the spirit. Our next function is to grow an understanding of and effectiveness. This is the first time they give us a new instruction of the next function. This is what we're doing next. Like if you're working or driving, if you're on the way here, say, hey, are you on the highway? Yes. You did everything to get to where? Yes. Where are you? I'm here. Well, your next turn off, your next function, they're preparing you for the next group of information. So here, this is not an overnight matter. It should continue for a lifetime. Continue to watch for, not work on. There's a difference between watching for something and working on something, right? To continue to watch for selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, and fear. When these crop up, we ask God at once to remove them. We discuss them with someone immediately and make amends if we have harmed anyone. Then we reservedly turn our thoughts to someone we can help. That sounds like 12-step work and step 11 work, doesn't it? Doesn't it sound like 12 and 11? Why are they talking about step 12 and step 10? Because it's an overview, right? And we have ceased fighting anything or anyone, even alcohol, for by this time sanity will have returned. By what time? Good question. By what time? Well, they talk about by the time I'm halfway through. That was the beginning of the thought. By the time I'm halfway through this phase of my development. Somewhere along the line, this problem that was a problem gets removed. They reiterate that in the spiritual appendix. What usually takes place in a few months could seldom have been brought about by years of self-discipline. We'll suddenly realize that God is doing for us what we could not do for ourselves. This change is witnessed by everybody around us, right? And I get to experience this daily reprieve, not contingent on my ability to see, feel, and touch it, on the ability that this thing's removed. And it stays removed so long as I maintain my recipe. Now here's a really interesting part. We're going to go over it. Remember, I'm just going to hit the highlights. And if you want more, we do workshops and we have them available if anybody wants to do a really in-depth study. So they talk about here on page 85. They go through this recipe. On 85 they said, much has already been said about receiving strength, inspiration, and direction from him who is all knowledge and power. If, right, is the biggest word in the book. If we have carefully followed directions, so from step 3 to here, something has taken place, right? So the step 3 idea now becomes the confirmation of that process that was available in step 3. Step 3 is an idea. How many people didn't know that? How many people know the book says that? Step 3 is an idea. The wording is quite optional, so long as we express the idea. The idea of what? That this relationship is possible through a course of action, right? So they talk about we have carefully followed. We have begun to sense the flow of His Spirit into us, which talks about step 5. Talks about that spiritual beginning of the spiritual experience, right? To some of us, we have become God conscious. We have begun to develop this vital sixth sense, but we must go further. Must go further than where we are. They talked about that up the paragraph. To stay where we are would mean our own demise, right? We must go further. Now, I'll close with this. They talk about step 11. When we retire at night, why didn't they start that in the morning? What night? When we retire at night. What night are they talking about? When I'm halfway through my 9s, do I start 11? The steps are in order for a reason. Oh, yeah, because we look at 8 and 9. We don't do nothing about 8 and 9. We read step 10 and we start 11. Step 11 is the only 24-hour process that we have in our book. Anybody find that interesting? And why do we, what night? The night I finish my step 7. I just done my 5. I've done 6 and 7. I read through 8 and 9. I read through 10. And that night I start 11. That's the way the book's outlined. And in my morning meditation, I ask what I need to do for that day. What amends need to be addressed. What power do I need to access to get the strength to overcome self as I go forward. To be an example of this thing. Because our real job is to fit ourselves to be of maximum service to God and the people around us. To fit ourselves, not to conveniently wait for an opportune moment. To fit ourselves. Trudging the road of happy destiny, not to happy destiny. Walking with purpose. Right? We have, it's a design for life that really works. On 98 says we are undisciplined. What they mean by that is the way we think and the way we conduct ourselves. So they reconfirm. So we discipline ourselves in the way that was just outlined. What was just outlined? Step 11. Step 11 is it puts everything together. You want to do step 10, it's in 11. You want to do 8 and 9, it's in 11. Everything's in 11. Everything's about your relationship with a power greater than yourself. You want to be of service to other people? It's in 11. All the way through 9, they talk about 11. All the way through the book, the only step they talk about, a reoccurrence, is step 11. They close it by saying, make sure your relationship is right. Right? Ask in your morning meditation what you could do for the man who still suffers. Obviously, you can't transmit something you haven't got. See to it that your relationship is right. When they say, we only know little, and people say, the book, no, you only know little. What they're talking about is 12-step work. That's what they mean by we only know little. Because we just read, we have the recipe to tap into with the creator of the universe to have an experience beyond anything we could ever imagine. Right? And the next function is to grow an understanding and effectiveness of that relationship. So if anybody wants more, this just highlights something that you could, I see some of you are praying now, so I'll end with that. I'd like to welcome anybody newer coming back to the Fellowship of AA. Great place to start. I always like to look on people's face when I walk up here with a big book. It's like, oh no. It's to remind me what this is all about, right? And roundups are really, really important. If you kind of, I think the basis of this thing is to remind us the gift and what this is all about, right? It's not about my story. You guys are in for a real treat. Got some phenomenal speakers this weekend, me being one of them. So you guys, and I say that in all humility, right? Because you know what? I represent something greater than me, right? I represent the story of Alcoholics Anonymous, right? What it could do for people like me. There's two groups of people in AA. There are those who represent their own ideas, their own program, right? And for me, sobriety. And then there are those who got sober through a course of action that was outlined by the people that came before us, right? And that's kind of our legacy. That's our responsibility, because there was no AA back then. There's no AA in the future. It's what's happening now, right? And what are we doing carrying this message? What are we doing for the alcoholic who still suffers? What are we doing for the person who's working on membership right now? I mean, just the mere fact that we're sitting in an AA meeting, right, considering where you were sitting not too long ago, and some of you look like you've been here a long time. So there's a couple fire extinguishers at each, no, just kidding. So, but it's one of those things that kind of remind me, like on the flight down here, I was kind of, I'd like to thank the committee and everybody that put this together. It takes a lot of work. So usually enjoyed by many, participated in the structure of it by few, right? So if you don't like the way things are going this year, you could volunteer next year. That's the way it goes, right? Simple, right? And we took a big hit over COVID. Good to see everybody and all that stuff. Is really real gift to be able to back here, because this is where the juice is, right? One-on-one, right? The transmission of this thing, the kind of, down in the trenches, shoulder to shoulder, right? Where you get in there and you kind of, you forget all about you for a little while when you're talking to a newcomer, right? There's a recipe in Alcoholics Anonymous. And if we don't get back to it or we don't stick to it, then what happens is the new person is the one who don't get this thing, and they're the one who dies of alcoholism. Just because you're sitting in a meeting doesn't mean you got this thing. It's like if I didn't have an airplane ticket and an itinerary, I wouldn't have left Vancouver, right? We had to put a lot of things in place. Right? I could sit in that airport every day for 90 days. Doesn't mean I'm going anywhere, but I could talk like I'm going somewhere, right? Where are you going? I'm going somewhere. Where? I don't know, but and that's kind of like that's the way AA was for me, and I got introduced to the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous that I thought was the program in 1978. Right, I got sober in 1989. I got 11 years of in and out. That means sufficient enough reason to come back here, but nothing happened in here sufficient enough to keep me here, which is kind of scary when you think about it, right? Because if the first 100 men and women would have got hold of me, they would have made sure they carried this message to me. They would have made sure before I moved on through any course of action that I understood the basics. Right now, and I never understood any of it, but I have a genius type mind. I'm probably the only one in the room here. I was sober a little while before I realized there's no slogan that says "figure it out," like I thought there was, because they're reading how it works, and I'm wondering how does this work, right? I don't know if you kind of like that, right? We kind of. I think we forget of how damaged we are coming in here under the lash of alcoholism. We think people are going to understand this thing when we talk about it. And this is not where it happened, right? There's nobody going to leave here and go, "Oh, eureka, I found a recipe," right? It's the one-on-one. It's the kind of carrying of this message that makes the difference. And I think roundups, we need to kind of remind each other what this is about, right? We kind of take a break from our average week or our lives, and we kind of get together, we kind of look around, and we see a lot of familiar faces. But we see a lot of faces that are not here anymore, right? Where do they go, right? And then we see a lot of people who are not involved anymore. We see the same people doing the same thing, right? Thanks, Ed, for the ride here. A lot of you know Ed. I prayed a bit on the plane here, but I really prayed on the road here. Jesus, help me now. No, it was kind of like that. So if you're having a hard time connecting with a power greater than yourself, ride with Ed for a little while. Right? And it was great coming here, by the way. We're coming, and it's like we're in the car. We pulled over because we're waiting for someone to follow us. They passed us, and there was a cop following them. It was like the old days, right? Hey, there's a cop following you. Slow down. And we're chasing the cops. It looked really weird, right? So there's a man in front of us, the cops, and then us, Ed. Ed was doing 60. Now he's doing 130. Out of my way! I'm holding on to the big book. So, thanks, Ed, for getting me here. I'll need a ride home. No. So I have these squirrel moments, right? So you gotta. So I spent 11 years in and out of the fellowship not knowing what this thing was about because I was trying to figure it out. We give the impression that you should be able to figure this out. We give the impression that we read how it works for the new person. How it works is not for the new person. That's chapter 5. It's for us to remind us.
It's just a little hard to hear, so.
Is that, okay. I'm an alcoholic. My name's Tony. I go to 11 anyways, right? You said, my sponsor used to say, good thing is you get to speak once. After that, it doesn't matter, right? So anyhow, moving right back. And we got great Al-Anon speaker. It's going to be this weekend. You ever hear people say, I wake up with untreated alcoholism every day? You ever hear people say that? Well, they got an Al-Anon meeting tomorrow. You can find how to treat it, right? So one of the things that kind of I missed here was the idea, I'd get bumper sticker sobriety and catchphrase sobriety. I mean, I'd hear something really good at one meeting, I'd share it at the next meeting, and I'd formulate a talk, an AA talk. I'm at home thinking about killing myself. I come to 5 minutes before the meeting, I get the acceptance phase on and surrender. If you want what I got, and here's my number, let's start dating. So it's kind of like I was nuts, but I'm the only one that didn't know I was nuts. Like when you look back, like my cheese and cracker weren't even on the same plate. Like it was totally, but if you asked me, a little bad luck, just a little bad luck, 11 years. So I got introduced to AA, and I knew there was something here. Because I just met my dad, who was 4 years sober. We're living under an alias. I found out what my real name was. He found me through my godmother that we were kind of in hiding from. He found God in the sanitarium for being a danger to himself and the people around me. So he was making amends to me. So the first time I got introduced to my dad, I was 16. I got this phone call, and I'm blasted, like I'm gone. You know what I mean? It's like drinking broiler makers. I'm involved in little purple things that kind of help you see things differently, and some Thai stick. And this is my 16th birthday, and I'm just kind of way out there. And this guy goes, "Hey, how you doing? I'm looking for this guy." I said, "Yeah, you found him." He says, "Well, do you know any other Tonys?" I said, "Yeah, the phone book's full of them." He says, "Well, I'm your dad." And I didn't know, man, this is good stuff. Whatever I'm doing, it's good. Like I'm tripping. I sit down. And he says to me, he starts using certain language like he thought I would understand what he's talking about. He says, "Hi, I'm a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. I'd like to meet you and your mom and make amends." Right? And I didn't know what any of that meant. And my mom came home, and I said, "Hey, this guy phoned, and he said he was my dad." And she says, "We're moving." that was it. We're moving. So because I got 3 stories, I got my story, my mom's story, my dad's story, and kind of our story, right? And I'm just going to stick to my story. I found all the healing that I needed through the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. I was outlined in the big book. I had the pleasure of talking at my dad's eulogy. He died before his 40th anniversary. But he kind of missed this thing. He was sober. He was sober, but I mean, if you ask the people in his household how well he was doing, it wasn't the same talk he was giving at meetings, right? And that seems to be a lot of this thing, right? It's not a presentation of what I'd like you to see. This is who I am, right? I share experience, strength, and hope. What I used to be like, what happened, and what I'm like now. What you come walk in my life, what I share from the podium is exactly how my life is, 100%, right? Maybe a bit of exaggeration, but none of us exaggerate. No, I'm just joking. So I started this process. My first meeting I went to, I heard of this change, because what's really weird is just prior to that, at 15, I was standing on the 18th story of a building thinking about killing myself. I was on a 3-day drunk involving other things, and I thought, I just got out of a controlled environment, grew up in Toronto. And I thought, if I got to live the rest of my life like this, could you, like when I look at like my daughter when she was 15 and other people at 15, kind of imagine the torment that this person must have been experiencing to think if this is the rest of my life. And I found the magic in alcohol like at an early age, right? It's not the first drink that kind of caused alcoholism. It was the thought of the second one when it began. I've had many times where I've had a drink, and that was it. Like as a kid, drinking Ryan Cokes or wine and stuff like that at the parties in Quebec or wherever. And I never thought of a next one. But I remember the first time I thought of the next drink before I was finished the first drink. And that's when alcoholism started. And that was unbeknownst to me, right? I was still in a controlled environment. I think I was 14. And then I got out of there, got hooked up with some professionals that teach me the ropes. And so... Which is really weird is kind of when I was on that balcony, I was having a heart-to-heart with life, God, and myself. And that incomprehensible demoralization. I was looking down at the dumpster thinking it's going to hurt if I hit it half and half. Right? Like I'm having this kind of conversation, right? And then I started, reflecting on my own funeral. I don't know if anybody's ever done that. I'm at my own funeral. I'm on an 18th story of a balcony, kind of, I have 3-day drunk, and I'm kind of wired for sound. And I watch all these people going by and such pretentious. And then my certain aunt went by and says, "I knew it, he was never good in." I got resentful at her at a funeral that wasn't happening. And I said, "I'll show you." And I didn't jump. right? Because I was resentful at her. So there was an intervention even standing there. As weird as that may sound, that conversation saved my life. That wasn't even happening, right? Fancied or real, right? These things in my mind. But what was the real miracle is shortly afterwards, my dad called me and it introduced me to Alcoholics Anonymous. And if you kind of look at the lineage or the history of this thing, when Bill went to treatment 3 times, the 3rd time in treatment, he acquired some information that he put into practice, and it was the start of the miracle of Alcoholics Anonymous. But the 2nd time in treatment, the founder of Alcoholics Anonymous, the 2nd time in treatment, and he talked about what he wouldn't do to change his life, right? What he wouldn't do to make amends, right? And he even admitted alcohol was his master, and that in itself was not enough to create a change. And then shortly afterwards, which is really wild, is Ebby called him while Bill was sitting at the kitchen table drinking. Ebby called him, who hadn't experienced too much prior to that because some people came and persuaded the judge to suspend his sentence, and they gave him a couple ideas that created this change. And what's really cool is when he phoned Bill, got on a train and went and meet him, when he opened the door, Bill seen there was something different about him. At 2 months sober, nobody was seeing anything different about me different as at 2 months sober, right? I was going around trying to convince everybody how much I've changed. I'm probably the only one here, right? I've really changed, honest. You got a 20? No, so it's like, so it's kind of like, it was always motive kind of built. And he sat at the kitchen table with Bill while he was drinking, which is pretty wild. He sat at the kitchen table with Bill as he was drinking, and he shared his experience, right? And Bill couldn't get past his own thinking. And they talked for about 2 hours. When you think about this, he was talking about his experience for 2 hours, explaining this relationship with this power that created the change, and his ideas of miracles were revised right then and there. But he was still stuck with his thinking, right? And then this is where the miracle of Alcoholics Anonymous started happening. He says, why don't you choose your own conception? But that's after he explained the solution, right? And Bill seen it was only a matter of being willing to do what he saw in his friend, that he might get what he got. Made a decision, went to the hospital somewhat shortly afterwards, right? Confirmed his decision and went through a course of action under the guise or under the supervision of his friend. His friend promised when these things were done, he would enter upon a relationship with a power greater than himself that answers all his problems. And that's the transformation that's missing in a lot of places in Alcoholics Anonymous, right? People talk about change, but their actions don't talk about change at all. Right? My sponsor used to say, if I couldn't hear what you're saying, would I be able to see what you're saying? A lot of people talk in past tense, what I used to do. This is not a used to do thing. What are you doing? I used to do a lot. Well, you used to be sober too. So it's kind of like, that's a daily reprieve from what? So either you don't understand alcoholism, or you never really did step 1 of this course of action to keep you sober, or you haven't experienced the miracle of Alcoholics Anonymous. This is where I start making friends, right? Because if you did, there's something that we can't fabricate. And that's this thing that happens from the inside out. This is the thing when Bill was lying in the hospital, he thought other people might benefit what was so freely given to him. This is that transition they talk about in the spiritual appendix in the back of the book. This wow moment. Right, the story of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I spent 11 years trying to find the story of Alcoholics Anonymous by creating it on my own volition or my own power or my own understanding. Right, because in all that time, which is kind of weird, I never got 12-stepped into the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. So I can go into 11 years of things like join the army, join this, join that, join the Baptist church, join the Nazarene church, on and on and on. 11 years of good enough reasons, right, to get sober. But nothing sufficient happened. So my last relapse, I spent 360 meetings in 90 days. I came out from Toronto. I got a visit from the sergeant that asked maybe it'd be good to relocate. So he says not everybody makes it to the station. I'm not even going to get into all that stuff, right? So it was sufficient enough where I got a private visit from one of the people in one of the divisions in Toronto to maybe relocate. And that time I'm puking green bile and dying of alcoholism. And I'm in and out of AA. My home group, my dry date was in pencil. I just couldn't get past the voices in my head. Just don't drink no matter what. I'm trying. I seem to be drinking no matter what. Anybody coming back, the whole group would just kind of look at me and just give me that useless advice. Just don't do it. What do you think I've been trying to do? I haven't found that in here, by the way. That's not the message of Alcoholics Anonymous. Just don't do it. Meeting makers make it, not if you're an alcoholic. Right? Because we lost the message. The message was, we already know you're going to relapse. We already know you're doomed to an alcoholic death if you're of our type. I didn't know what that type was because I was getting information from people who were different than me. Why? Because I was trying to do what they were doing to get sober and it wasn't working for me. And I didn't know that. I remember going to a party once and I said, I'm really nervous. I was sober, I think 3 months or could have been 2 weeks. One of those times in 11 years. I've in and out. I got enough 24-hour chips to start a group. So it was kind of like, so I said, I'm going to this party with my friends and there's a couple girls there I like. I really want to go. And he says, well, just make sure you hang on to a ginger ale or not. Makes sense. And he says, if anybody asks you if you want to drink, just say there wouldn't be enough for both of you. I found a solution to alcoholism. Unbelievable. I went to this party. And I'm walking around, it should be on the 20 questions. I'm holding my drink up thinking everybody in the party should know I'm drinking ginger ale. Normal people don't do that stuff, right? Hey, Tony, you want a beer? Oh, no, if I started, there wouldn't be enough for both of us. So, yeah, we know, Tony, we know. So 11:15 comes around. The guy finishes afternoons. I'm sitting on the couch drinking my ginger ale, hanging onto my glass. Don't let it go, And if you'd asked me, Tony, you think you'd be drinking 15 minutes from now? I said, no, look, I made it all night. I got this catchphrase sobriety, which I didn't know was catchphrase sobriety because I thought I could be my own solution if I just stay on guard and stay, diligent on this thing. The guy sits down and goes, hey, what are you drinking? I said, ginger ale. He says, oh, you want a beer? I said, oh, no, if I started, there wouldn't be enough for both of us. He says, I got 5 flats in the back. I guess there would be. So I understand that as the step 1 promise. Right? Somewhere along the line, I don't know where it changed, probably treatment. Treatment centers changed it, where if I'm paying you to treat me, you better give me information that I like. Right? Because our first big book is the most expensive book we'll ever own. It almost cost us everything we got. The second one's $16. You'll get that somewhere along the line, right? And so I've been to 2 treatment centers. The best in Canada, Donwood Institute. I had a keen knowledge, just like the guy, inner workings of my mind, triggers, all this other stuff, but I didn't understand alcoholism. So there, they gave me the impression, if I just watch what I'm doing, don't go to slippery places, I should be my own solution. And that's not the message of Alcoholics Anonymous. It's not. But somewhere along the line, it started, well, we can't, the new people, you can't tell them the truth, but you're killing them by lying to them. Right? Like if somebody would have told me the truth, it would have got me. You know what the best part of step 1 is? If you really understand it, it makes step 2 look really good. If you're feeling good about step 1, you haven't done it. Yeah, my mind's got a contract on my ass, left to my own devices. I'm going to die a horrific death. How do you feel about it? Pretty good. That's the truth. Like so squirrel. So I'm trying all this stuff. Like, and then one guy says, oh, you lack discipline. I remember sitting over a drink thinking, where would a guy get discipline? I joined the Army. They don't want people like me in the Army. Like that was like, it was a funny time when I look back, right? I got in, I had an afro, shoulder wide, and I got a leather coat, my dad's biker boots, I got rings on, and I got an attitude like the streets of Toronto. And so I went to, just before one of these camps, recruiting camps, whatever you call it, getting ready for the flight to go to Cornwallis. I got into a fight. I don't remember with who, because they used to say on the 20, you ever suffer from blackouts? I said, I don't remember, right? So I don't know. So I got in a fight with these guys, and I guess somewhere along the line I must have puked on myself and something happened. So I got on this plane, I'm going to boot camp, And they sat me in between a captain and a lieutenant. I didn't know that at the time. And I'm smelling like the night before, but I'm used to the smell. Nobody knows. Like, I'm sitting there trying to hide it. And black guy like this, afro like this, and I'm sitting between these two military guys. So where are you going? I said, I think I'm going to this place, boot camp. I said, they're going to love you there. So I got out of there before, and I went to Cyprus, and that's another whole thing, resentment. I loaded up an FNC-1 military assault rifle while I was drunk. It was blanks, but nobody seen any humor in that, and I started firing at the guys I was pissed off at. So they thought maybe it's not a good idea to go represent Canada in a foreign country. So I got a 4C release, honorable discharge. But that's another story. That didn't work. So I left there, and I'm puking blood by the time I leave there, and I'm starting to go into seizures when I'm not drinking. So my last relapse, 360 meetings in 90 days. This guy named George, and there was a guy by the name of Machine Gun Jerry, probably nobody knows him. But they used to go around the fellowship looking for people who were dying of alcoholism. There's George, Rick, and Steve. And what they do, they would assess you based on the questions they asked you in that meeting. Then they would invite you into a home group where they introduced you to the program of recovery, and they took you through a course of action, right? So George went through this course of action, and I used to feel good about looking at George, because when I looked at George, he had a red nose and he'd shake all the time, psoriasis. I thought, if I ever got that bad, I'm cutting my own hair, I'm unemployable, I'm puking green bile. I hadn't had a good movement in years, right? And I'm thinking, look at that guy, right? I'm just a train wreck, but I can't see myself as I am, because I've conditioned myself not to be able to look in the mirror and not even see me. I was numb to everything and everybody. I conditioned myself because I couldn't change what I was doing, so I changed my view and my opinion and my approach to life, and I became a lone wolf in Alcoholics Anonymous. Imagine that, dying of alcoholism in AA. And I'm not alone. Change the message, change the recipe, change the outcome. How do you know that's happening? Look at the people who are getting involved. Very few people are getting involved because we're changing the message of Alcoholics Anonymous. Back when I got sober, you had to go on a wait list to get on the phones and home groups and get on committees. Like, people remember those days? Why? Because they were entrenched in the message of Alcoholics Anonymous. Now we started worrying about how people feel. Get over it. They're dying. Tell them the truth. So this guy, squirrel. So I'm back again. So George changes. He has this profound change through going through this course of action. Same like the lineage as everybody that went through this. If you want what we have and are willing to go to any lengths to get it, then you're ready to take certain steps. It doesn't involve meetings. Meetings help, but meetings won't help you. It may sound kind of weird, but if you're alcoholic, it doesn't matter what you do. Absent of a psychic change or spiritual experience, you're doomed to failure. Right? When they said no human power, I didn't know that was including me. I can't be the only genius type mind here. I thought, sure it wasn't Brenda or Kim. I thought they would fix me for sure, but no, just got them and Al-Anon. You're welcome. I got a couple there. Anyways, Amber knows me for a long time. Some of you think I'm joking. She knew me anyways. So George had this profound change. And he started to do something that saved my life. And this is the story of Alcoholics Anonymous. He didn't ask me permission to start working with me. He just started working with me. By me being in the meeting, I gave him consent. Right? Because I would have never picked George as my sponsor. I would have never picked him as somebody who's going to help me. He would start coming up to me and say, how you doing? I said, good. He says, when are you coming to this big book study workshop we're doing? I said, oh, no. I know what not to do now, because people say that who don't understand alcoholism. I'm never drinking again. You don't understand alcoholism. See, when you make those statements, the obsession has left. I don't think about it no more. I'm okay. You don't understand alcoholism. You haven't done step 1 yet. I know I'm making friends. Because if you could see, feel, and touch it, that's not step 1. Step 1 is an illness. It's a phantom. It's something that works within the mind that I can't see happening. And when it's happening, I'm drinking. Right? Bill was the first person that kind of made reverence. Was I crazy? Somebody pushed a drink my way. Was I crazy? I began to wonder. his lack of inability to keep himself sober no matter what the necessity or the wish. He's one of the founders of Alcoholics Anonymous. He tried to get sober for 5 years. 5 years till somebody carried a message to him sufficient enough for him to have an experience, and he learned a recipe and he started working with other people. And it was such a profound message that the doctor seen this that allowed him to start working in his facility with other patients of his type that were beyond human aid, that were of the hopeless variety. So George started working with me, and I'd have these bumper sticker catchphrase sayings, and I'd feel really good. Soother sobriety, I call it. Give me a false sense of that I got it this time. He walked up to me, he says, "Oh, that sounds great." And first time I puffed my chest up. He says, "What does it mean?" I said, "What do you mean, what does it mean? Weren't you listening?" He says, "Oh, no, I heard what you said." He says, "What does it mean?" He says, "Let's start with the basics." He says, "Rarely have we seen a person fail who has clearly followed our path. What are they talking about?" I showed him the directory and I said 90 meetings in 90 days. Because I thought the fellowship was the program. And if I just sit in meetings, I'll be able to gather my program of recovery sufficient enough for me to recover. Nowhere in 11 years did my brain says, "Hey, Tony." I went, "What? Maybe you're not getting this thing." Right? Because each time based on my understanding, it was going to be different. Of course it would be different because I never understood alcoholism. So George Sino was dying. Make a long story short, he goes, "We're starting a new group." He says, "Do you mind coming and giving us a hand?" So I went to the guy who was teaching me about the traditions in AA, and you can't throw chairs around, you can't grab people by the throat, you got to be nice, you can't heckle people when they're speaking at meetings. You can't do none of that. He says, "It's not a bar." I said, "I don't know if I like this place." No, so anyways, and I learned how to conduct myself in AA meetings. Like, I wasn't getting invited nowhere, like home group, coffees, nothing. I found out from my home group that I was trying to get sober from 87 to 89, that they used to go for coffee after the meeting. I found out by a newcomer. He says, "Hey, Tony, you coming for coffee?" I said, "I've been coming here a year and a half." He says, "Yeah, we go every week." So I went and I got barred from the restaurant. So it was kind of, so I'm living in AA. And so George says, "When are you coming help us out?" I went and seen Chuck, and I said, "Chuck, see, these guys want me to go help them through the steps." Now, mind you, I'm in 4, 12, and 12 studies. I'm running one. I'm talking about Bill's experience, hoping that it's going to be my experience, but I never did the work to get Bill's experience. I'm sitting around talking about Bill's experience. The 12 and 12 is not the steps of recovery. I didn't know that, but I got taught that. So George says, "When are you coming help us out?" So I said, "Okay, I'll be there." Talked to my sponsor. I went to this meeting. I went with the 12 and 12. I opened the door. Judy was there. She was a member of Al-Anon, and her eyes were huge. I thought, wow, something weird with that woman. Like, her eyes were like bug-eyed when she seen me at her door, like I knew her address, right? She was really worried and concerned because about 6 months prior to that, I got in a fight with a couple guys in the meeting. Before the meeting, we were arguing about something, probably a girl. So she came out and she goes, "What are you guys doing?" I says, "We're having a discussion." She says, "We have a meeting going on over there." So what kind of meeting? She says, "Al-Anon." I said, "What's that?" She goes, "You three knew?" I said, "Yeah." She goes, "I don't got the time to explain it 3 times," and turn around and laugh. No. I thought, what a weird woman. So I went to this, knocked on the door. She opened it. It was like, I thought, she talks funny too. So I went in, and God bless Al-Anon. That woman learned to love me because she loved her husband. And she knew her husband's sobriety and his lifeline was dependent on him carrying the message. She wasn't thrilled on the idea of who, but George fixated on me. They told him to go find the sickest guy he knew, and that guy was out of town, so he started working with me. And I used to think, what's this guy's problem? I used to like George until when I started realizing, like, he knows something that I don't want people to know, that I don't know. That's why newcomers like hanging around with newcomers. You guys sharing, "Oh, that was great, that was great." And the old timers go, "What the hell are you people talking about," right? That was me. So they started, for the first time in 11 years, as weird as this may sound, they introduced me to the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. First time in 11 years, thousands of meetings. I started going through this thing, and something started to happen. One, I seen the hopelessness of my situation. They explained alcoholism, the malady that precedes the first drink that people don't talk about, which is on page 23, is the second symptom in alcoholism that places us beyond human aid. So how should we help the reader to determine to their own satisfaction whether they are one of us? That determines whether you're one of us or not. And by the time I got to page 44, my sponsor sat me down. He says, the first paragraph on page 44 in We Agnostics says, in the preceding chapters, you've learned something of alcoholism. We hope we made clear the distinction between alcoholic and non-alcoholic. He asked me to explain that to him, right? And to go through the book and to back up the points that we're talking about. The same way the two guys, when they revisit that guy who thought he had a problem. Admitting you have a problem in step one is two different things. A lot of people in AA admit they have a problem, but they haven't done step one yet, right? And that guy on page 40, if you want to look at it later, it's an amazing story because he was convinced that he would never drink again. Anybody who's convinced of that hasn't done step one, or step one doesn't apply to you. Because if you're convinced of that, then you really don't need our solution, do you? You could be your own solution. But if you're convinced without a shadow of a doubt that you're in a collision course with another drink, that you're beyond human aid, then the solution makes sense of the idea that I need to obtain a psychic change or spiritual experience. We Agnostics is actually the introduction to step 3. Right? And by the time I got to step 3, what happened for me is I understood alcoholism from their point of view. I understood the solution from their point of view, and I was able to choose my own conception, which is the formulating of an idea and a direction. That's what conception means based on what they were talking about. Whenever he was talking to Bill, Bill formulated his ideas based on what he was hearing, on the idea if he obtained the same solution that his friend did, he could have the same experience. That's the message of Alcoholics Anonymous. They put it in here. And by the time I got to step 3, they said it was an idea. Step 3 was an idea, because if I was able to experience the transformation as outlined or people talk about, then I wouldn't need to do the rest of the steps. If I was able to formulate a relationship with a power greater than myself, in step 3 it'd be a 3-step program. Right? Step 3 is an idea. Do I want to continue on this course of action? Right? Because I have 2 alternatives: go on to the bitter end or accept some spiritual help, which is outlined through the rest of the course of action. So step 2 is really the course of action laid out by those that went before me. Step 3 is my decision to carry through it. So the confirmation of step 1 is another drink. The confirmation of the idea, step 2, is step 12. Having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps. The idea of this relationship in step 3 that would be possible through a course of action is step 11, right? I don't mean to piss off nobody, but I tend to do this. My story, my experience, this is how I look at it. I don't do 10, 11, and 12 every day. I do 11. It's the only step in our manual that's operating on a 24-hour clock. It's the only step that talks about removing the barriers, right? Because if I was really doing all the steps, then I wouldn't have a problem in 10 if I'm doing 11, would I? If I was doing it every day. And if I was doing it every day, step 12 covers all the steps. Step 12 is about carrying this message. So I formulated this relationship with a power greater than myself was sufficient enough for me to start doing my amends. And as I started to do my amends, that's where this thing started showing up of my personal experience with what you people were talking about. And as I started to do this thing, unbelievable things started, coincidences started to happen, or these things that started to happen that were unexplainable. Profound things that kind of shook my foundation. But what's really weird is I forget those things. That's why we do a recipe. It's a daily recipe, right? That's why after step 7, it goes right into 11. When we retire at night, upon awakening, it gives me the spiritual correction I need to do, not to be repeating the same problems and pitfalls of the past. Right? I learned the recipe that Bill W. learned is not to work on myself. It's the shifting from me to something greater than me. And when I get stuck on self, go help somebody else. That's the recipe. What worked is a way of life that worked in rough going. And that's the recipe I learned. And so one of the amends I made, I had to go to Quebec, so I took a bus from Vancouver. It's 4 days on the bus. I talked to some members about their experience, strength, and hope. Right, because I couldn't fly them because I still had warrants. That's another thing. Anyway, So I had to go so the amends I took care of were the ones I prayed about, and they came to my consciousness. They were the ones that showed up in my life. I didn't make a decision to do all those things. They came up in my meditation. And people just started showing up, and I had a plan based on my conversation with my sponsor and the outlay that's in step 9. That's why it says this thought brings us to step 10, not these groups of actions, right? And the promises talk about by the time we're halfway through what? This process. The spiritual appendix in the back of the book says what usually takes place in a few months could hardly have been brought about by years of self-discipline. So when they talk about in step 10, which is an outlay of this whole thing, the only 2 paragraphs, less than half a paragraph talks about you. The rest is all about your relationship with a power greater than yourself, and formulating that and make sure you maintain it and develop it, because what we have is a daily reprieve. Daily reprieve from what? By this time the problem has been removed. Halfway through your 9th, somewhere along the line, the problem gets removed and you don't know when it happens. And you don't know when it comes back. So our reliance is on something greater than us, right? Because I've been coming in AA up to 45 years. I've been sober as the result of this recipe outlined in this book through the guidance of another member, right, for over 33 years. That's the miracle of Alcoholics Anonymous. That's the story. When you open this book, one of the first things it says, the story of how many thousands of men and women who have recovered. Most of us think the most important part is the recovery part. No, it's the story. The story. Look at my life before this thing got a hold of me. And once this thing got a hold of me, I wasn't the same. They took me through that course of action. The first thing I did was start a big book study. From the home into a meeting. And it was a BYOB meeting, Friday night at the Burnaby Fellowship. Started 32 years ago. I think it's still going. I've been involved in big book study workshops ever since. The recipe, working with new people. We had one of the biggest, before COVID, had one of the biggest workshops in Canada. Pretty amazing, the transformations that I've watched happen in other people's lives as those watched in my life. So I'm on this bus and I got to go see these people. They told me to sit up front. I'm talking to God. There's a contract on page 63. Right, with this thing between me and my Creator. It says, if I'm willing to perform His work well, He'll take care of everything I need, not what I want, to be able to face life on life's terms, right? So I'm on this bus, I'm listening to cassettes, the Grapevine, the Grapevine reps here, great literature. They had it on cassettes back then. I'm listening to that. Meeting on the go, and I'm sitting in the front of the bus, and I'm on the last part of the bus trip. Everywhere I stopped, asked if there was any friends of Bill W. Nobody's showing up, so it's me and God. And what I learned here, and going back to the recipe. So I'm sitting, and the closer I get, the more anxiety I'm having. And now I stop, I'm arguing with God. Nobody ever argued with God here? And I'm saying, I'm sitting there in the seat going, hey, pal, you dropped the ball, man. I'm not feeling it. That's how I used to talk to God. He's okay with that. It's like, a little kid talking to an adult. Right? So, as I'm not feeling this, you said you look after me. I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. You're dropping the ball here. I'm not feeling this. And this lady beside me goes, you okay? I said, yeah. I had to take off my headphones. I said, yeah. She goes, what's going on? I said, I got to go visit these people. I'm doing this thing like in a man. She goes, oh, yeah, I know what you're talking about. I'm a member of Alcoholics Anonymous for the last 20 years. I look, funny guy. And that's how it's, when they talk about the solution, they call it a phenomenon. It's unexplainable events. And us being here is really an unexplainable event for people like us. Because you just think of the pain of the people that would endure around us, the kids, the parents, right, the employers. How many people's lives we more than touched, we devastated. And then it got to a place where we were devastated, without hope and without any kind of direction. And I came to Alcoholics Anonymous looking for a solution. The solution's outlined in here. If your sponsor doesn't have you in this, get another sponsor. It's the first thing they should introduce you to. If you got a sponsor who's asking you to read page 417, get another sponsor. Right? Because if you're able to fix you with you and doing catchphrase and frothy emotional appeal and all that other stuff, then you would have changed a long time ago. What you need to find out is, why do I keep on doing what I'm doing in spite of this thing? Right? Why? Right? And this book will answer that. By the time you get to page 44, you'll know that. And if you can't explain it, you're not going to be here long. you don't know what your problem is, I already know you're not staying. The only one that don't know they're staying is you. You know how many people are not here anymore that thought they'd be here forever? I know some of you are arguing in your mind right now, but I could show you what I'm talking about. You can't show me what you're talking about. You're having a one-sided argument with you. I'm talking about the message of Alcoholics Anonymous. Right? When these guys came and visited this guy who relapsed after having this kind of conversation with him, and he relapsed again, then they took him through step 1 again. And he being with the conviction that he couldn't do the job himself. Then they introduced him to step 2. So as I started going through this thing, I started having this relationship with a power greater than myself, and really profound things started to happen. Because what am I doing is I'm now waking up with the idea of representing my own ideas. I wake up in the morning and ask how I could be of service. What do I got to do? 33 years sober, I still do 3 big book study workshops a week. I still have a home group. I'm involved in that home group. I vote in that home group. Right? And I still go to other meetings where I'm active. When my phone rings, I answer it. I make myself available. I go out with a woman that's a normie. God bless her. We all have our problems. So she's a normal drinker. I don't understand her at all. Not at all. I used to think she did stuff to bother me, right? But no, that's just the way they are. They're weirdos. They're weird. They're weird. I remember, I think we were married 4 years, and she goes, hey, you know a lot about alcoholism? I said, yeah. Like, yeah. She goes, does wine go bad? I went, I don't know. And then I said, what does it matter? She says, what's the matter with you? I said, like, after a couple drinks with the vinegar, it's all the same, right? Some of you know what I'm talking about. I'm drinking stuff, other people go, what? Anyways, another thing she did, which is kind of weird, you ever hear this thing of pairing? Pairing? I thought pairing meant, okay, we'll do the tequila with the hash and with a bit of methamphetamine. I thought that was pairing. We're going to a concert. Oh, yeah, a couple hits of purple microdot, do some tea, grab a 40. Yeah. I thought that was pairing. She said, no wine with cheese. Oh, what the hell are you talking about? So, and fish and meats. So I thought, I'm thinking, oh my God, what have I got myself into? No, so I'm joking. So she's an amazing woman I've met through the recipe in the inventory. That's another thing. There's an inventory there on our future sex lives and inviting the relationship or creating the relationship we desire. It's also in the 4th step that a lot of people miss. That's how I met my wife when I was 16 years sober. Through enough pain, I went back to the book and it showed me that recipe where I invited God into it and I met her. That's a whole different story. But I go to the fridge one day and I go, hey, what's this? She goes, what's what? You know. She's in the living room. You know what's what. She goes, no, I don't know. In the fridge. She goes, what about the fridge? She's trying to figure out what I'm looking at. I'm looking at a glass of wine with cellophane on top of it. What's that? She goes, what? I said, look, there's only that much in there. She goes, yeah, I wanted to save it today. I was having some steak. I said, what's the matter with you? And I walked away. Like, that's crazy, right? Like, I caught her. I walked. She's a problem drinker. I know she is. I walked into the kitchen one day, and she's pouring it back into the bottle. So what are you doing? She says, I poured too much. I just go like this now. I just shake my head, walk away, right? She does shit like that, right? So, you know, she's absolutely fantastic. She supports what I do in Alcoholics Anonymous because she's witnessed the miracles of Alcoholics Anonymous. She's witnessed the tragedies that happen here and the people I've worked with who are no longer here, their kids, the memorials I go to, and the pain that goes deep. The only problem with getting sober for a while is you start living from the inside out. We were talking about that over dinner. Like, I'm turning into a big sap. Like, and I'm okay with it. I did a men's retreat roundup this weekend. And you know, you want to make a man uncomfortable, start crying. They're like, oh my God. They're all freaked out, right? And then because of gratitude, imagine that, being so grateful for your life in Alcoholics Anonymous that you can't contain it. Comes from the inside out. And that's what's available here. And you know what's also available here is that the promises are available for everybody around you. If you're the first one experiencing them in your life, you're not experiencing them. When the people around you start having a new freedom and new happiness, And when you show up at the door and you put the key in it, does everybody have anxiety inside that door? Like my dad, he was sober, he missed the whole boat. He found religion, he found Christ, and when he came to meetings, he was like helping in the community, but he lost it in his own home. Right, I had a pair of shoes in the front door, a pair of shoes in the back door. He was a very violent man. He was cruel and abusive to his kids and to the dogs. Like he was just a really hateful man. But I loved him. And I talked to it as his eulogy. He got me to speak, and he died of a horrific throat cancer, a really bad death. And I stayed with him for a week, and I nursed him, and I looked after him. And at his eulogy, you know what I was able to say? I was proud to know him. Because he introduced me to Alcoholics Anonymous. And Alcoholics Anonymous introduced me to the program of Alcoholics Anonymous that's in here. Somebody took the time out of their life when they could have been watching TV, when they could have been missing their home group, right? But you know what a home group is? People are going looking for you. They're coming. They're going to know you're there. And if you're not there because you find other things to do, pretty soon you find other things to do. There's no coasters in AA. The only coasters you'll find is under a drink. Right? A daily reprieve is a daily reprieve. And one of the things where they talk about here, most good ideas are simple. He is the father, we're his children. Right? He is the director, we're his agents. And when you pray for how to be of service, be prepared for some remarkable things that happen that are unexplainable. Because what you're doing is asking for guidance. And when that guidance comes is in the moment. If you don't listen to that voice, then there's somebody making a call right now. And God says, I hear you. I'm going to send one of my guys or one of my girls. I'm going to send somebody right now. They don't know that they're going there to meet you. But I'm going to hook you two up. Right? Because they're going to listen and they're going to show up. Bill had no idea what was about to happen to him. No idea whatsoever. Most of us have no idea whatsoever. I was working in the film industry and I got this call for a day call. I don't usually take day calls. And it says, no, you got to go out for a day call. Something said, go take the call. So I go to this day call. On the other side, I walk into this factory, and there's a guy sitting on a big thing of plywood. And he's sitting there. And I can't see him. He can't see me. And there's nobody else in the place. I open the door, and it's dark, and there's just a couple lights on. The closer I get to him, he goes, are you kidding me? I said, what? He says, I've been asking God for help. I've been sitting here asking what I'm going to do. And of all the people in the world that show up, you show up. Surprise! No. And we had a great time. He's still sober. There was another guy. He was sitting on a balcony, standing on a balcony, smoking a cigarette. And the empties were piled. His fingers were yellow. And he was having a moment like Bill did, and we all do. You know that moment where, how did I get here? Can't see no way out. And so what's funny about that is I had my sponsee phone me in the morning. He says, hey, I got a call. He's a window cleaner. He says, I got a call 10 minutes from my place. Yeah, life is great. Then he phoned me back 5 minutes later. He says, hey, you can't believe that. I got to go half an hour to this new job. I said, oh, so much for God, eh? When it's going your way, God's fantastic. Now that's inconvenient, it's a big problem. So he's cleaning these windows. And he bungee cords in on this guy on the balcony, hits him, he falls into the empties. How does that happen? One guy made a call, the other guy answered it. Right? And the only way he made that call is because he has the connection. Obviously, you can't transmit something you don't got. See to it that your own house is in order. We have a recipe that connects us to the realm of the Spirit. They talk about the fellowship that we come in here, and then they talk about the fellowship of the Spirit. And I'll close. I've got a lot of unbelievable stories. I don't know where I'm going with this one. So I'm in Hawaii, and I want to go to a meeting. You know how we go to a new place, want to go to a meeting. Right? I want to go to a meeting, talk about how great I am. How great this is, right? So, sorry, had a moment there. So we go to this meeting, like, I'm out of town, and I want to... And I read it wrong. It was 7 a.m., not 7 p.m. And they saw everything's 2 miles in Hawaii, right? It's like from here to where my hotel room is. And it took 20 minutes to get here anyways. I go back, my wife, I said 7 a.m. So next morning I set the alarm clock and I go back for a 7 a.m. meeting. I get there and I had the hitchhike, I had the jog, I had the, like there was no buses around that weird place, weird island. So I get there, there's nobody there. I say, hey, I said, the guy walks by, he says, hey, you here for the meeting? I said, yeah. He says, no meetings on holidays here. So I get back to the hotel. I go upstairs, I grab a Cuban cigar. I love cigars. And then so I grab a cigar and my wife goes, what are you doing? I said, I don't know what's going on. God has something going on. I'm just going to go over there under the palm tree on the nice grass, smoke the cigar and ask God what's going on, what's up. Right? So all those elements that I think are not working in my favor has me in a condition where I go grab a cigar. I go downstairs, something says, go over there to the breakwater. I look over there, there's nothing appealing. It's all lava rock and it's all breakwater and there's a high wall, nothing appealing. There's a palm tree over there with nice grass. I'm talking to God this way. I don't know if anybody does that. I said, I don't want to go over there. He says, I never asked you what you wanted to do. He says, go over there. I said, okay, I'll go over there. So I go over there because I'm spiritual now, right? And so I go, damn it, 28 years sober, I'm spiritual. So I go over there, I'm sitting there and trying to get, right? And there's this guy from here to the back wall sitting on a breakwater. And his arms are just going like this. Now it's 10:30 in the morning. His arms are going all over the place. And I think, wow, what's going on with him? He gets up, walks by me, which is really wild. And he says, hey, you want a snow cone? A snow cone? At this hour? He says, no, a beer. I said, no, I don't drink. He didn't even, as soon as I said no, he kept on walking. And the beers were in the sand. That's kind of weird. If you're a professional, they're right beside you. So why he would do that? Another element that he'd have to come by and talk. And so he went by me again and he stopped. And he looked at me. He says, I don't know why I'm talking to you. He says, I live on the other side of the island. He says, something told me to come here. He says, I was down there talking to God. I said, I knew you were talking to somebody, right? I figured God the way you were giving him the finger, right? So, and he says, yeah. He says, my wife just left me. He says, my life has fallen apart. He says, I was 8 years sober. He says, I was asking God why he abandoned me. I said, allow me to introduce myself. I'm a sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous. God arranged a trip from Vancouver for me to come and sit here to let you know that he hasn't abandoned you. That we have a course of action available to allow you to experience a new freedom and a new happiness. A usefulness beyond anything you could ever imagine. Comprehension of the word serenity and peace. And a usefulness to see how your experience can benefit others. This is the great news this book carries. And if your meetings and your AA isn't happening the way you want it to, it's because you're not carrying this message. Somebody's dropping the ball. Because see, when George got carried this message, something lit up from the inside out he couldn't hide or contain. And when they carried this message to me, something lit up in the inside I couldn't hide or contain. That's the 12th step, having an awakening. Right? And I'll close with this last thing is gratitude is something that is seen, it's not heard. What are you doing? So in other words, they use the passage in the book of a shipwreck. They use that kind of, and that in itself is not enough to keep us joined the way we are joined now. What we have is a common solution, right? A common language that's contained in here. That we all agree on it. Who agrees on it? Everybody that's done it. All our members, with a few exceptions, all our members have tapped into an inner resource of strength that they come to rely on, this daily reprieve. And so what happens is there's two ways of dying from drowning. You could actually drown again after, when you go home alone in your bed. You could actually drown from the water that you obtain. And the other one is hypothermia when you're out of the boat. I have my level 3 first aid, how can you tell? So when you get out of the water, it's not over yet. Well, one is exposure, the other is hypothermia. Just because you're in a meeting doesn't mean you're out of the water. You still have the ailment. It's lying dormant. You can't see, feel, and touch it. It's alcoholism. It has us. We don't have it. It's not a behavioral problem. And so when you go and get treatment for this thing and you come out of the treatment room, there's two things you can do with that. Those who are grateful will grab a handful of life jackets, get back into the boat because they know people are dying. And then there are people who go watch TV and tell everybody else how grateful they are. By the look of this room, there's a lot of grateful people, right? You're really involved, you're here, you're making this happen. This is the miracle of Alcoholics Anonymous. This is what roundups are all about. It's the reminder, the rejuvenating, the charging up, right? Because we are Alcoholics Anonymous, right? There's people working on membership right now. There's people around you in Alcoholics Anonymous who are dying of alcoholism. By you ignoring them and not carrying this message is participating in their death, right? So what saved my life was 2 responsible members of Alcoholics Anonymous introduced me to the program of Alcoholics Anonymous outlined in here. My family, my mom, my kids, and everybody that knows me and myself, I'd like to thank you for the beautiful gift you gave to me. May God bless you and keep you safe.